Howdy, y'all. This is the final episode of the second season of Moneyless Society. It's a conversation recorded, instigated by our very good friend and team member, collaborator, Nathan Jones, who runs the Kindness Rebellion podcast, a show that you should absolutely check in, a show about growing our emotional intelligence to respond to an insane, crazy world, to truly revolutionize how we relate to each other, how we listen, how we are amongst each other. Nathan had us come on his show for the capstone episode of his season and asked us questions about this moneyless society that he has been a true believer of the whole time. This is a fantastic conversation. We go deep into the material in Matthew Holton, our wonderful founder's book, which I'm going to tell you right now. Stop, pause. I'll even give you a beat of silence so you can go and get the book. Get the book. Matt has worked on this book for 5 fucking years, okay? You can spend a few dollars to get this book and go on the wonderful, wild ride of the journey that it is to deconstruct our world and put it back together into that shape. It's a great thing to give to people in your life to say, hey, look, here are answers. Here's the problem, explained in a clean, simple, efficient, and just damn fun to read way, and there are solutions in it. It's a beautiful antidote to a sick world, and I hope that this conversation will stoke you to want to learn more and go deeper and understand these concepts, ideas, and visions, so much so that, like Nathan, you go beyond being a listener and start being a participant, a creator, and say, how can we come together and make this world?
The old world is ending.
And we have the opportunity to rethink everything.
This is a show about the systemic problems in our world.
And the real solutions we have today.
To transition from an apocalyptic storm of war, scarcity, and ecological collapse.
To create an abundantly advanced, collaborative society.
That sustains all life.
You may think it's an impossible dream.
But the alternative is an inevitable nightmare.
We're your hosts, Matt Holton,
Amanda Smith,
and Zachary Marlowe.
And together,
we can move past this economic absurdity
and come together to actualize our collective potential.
To create something completely new.
We are
Moneyless Society.
Welcome one, welcome all. Thank you guys so much for coming onto the Kindness Rebellion. This is honestly an awesome opportunity for me to have all three of you here on the podcast with me. I got to say that I love the Moneyless Society. I love the work that you all have been doing. I love the message and the vision, and I'm really excited to bring you all onto the podcast. I've had Marlo on previously, and we had an awesome conversation, just kind of about our own personal history with, kind of becoming radicalized and learning all of the systemic bullshit that's been going on and how we've kind of coped with it. And it was one of my favorite episodes, and I'm so happy to have Matt and Amanda on here as well to go over just all of the nitty gritty of a moneyless society. I think one of the main things that I want to really cover today is just kind of the backlash that I tend to hear from people when I talk about a moneyless society, because I'm very passionate about it, and I think that there's a lot of there's a beautiful vision there, and there's many directions that we could all go with it. And so I'm excited to hear directly from you all, kind of like what a moneyless society means to you. So let's just go ahead and we'll start in order from my cameras. We'll start with Matt. What is a moneyless society to you?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, when I started the whole Moneyless Society website and everything, it was kind of like I was really just exploring that idea. It wasn't like I really had figured it all out, and I really still don't profess to have figured it all out. To me, I mean, what the direction that we're really headed here is a society that there's no currency. And we also try to eliminate the need for trade. And that means also like trading your time, your labor, in order to survive on a daily basis for, necessities or things that you need just to live. And in its place, we're trying to develop a system that would, just bring about abundance through technology and cooperation. Really, it just kind of heading the other direction from the competitive model that we have in place now. And instead of working within the profit model to where everybody's kind of keeping profit for themselves, where it's more of a sharing, equitable model. And eventually in the long term, we think those types of models would be able to uh, just essentially work better than the profit system at providing, what everybody needs.
Mm.
And there's a lot of details in there that are up for discussion and up for grabs. I mean, just kind of depending on where you are, the culture, the access to just local resources, things like that, geography. The solutions are going to be different, depending on, where people are, and their cultures and things like that as well. So there's a lot to consider, when talking about that. I think those ideas are definitely possible, but there's a lot up for discussion as well. So I like to emphasize that point and say, we don't have like some dogmatic system that we're trying to preach to everybody. We're really just trying to kind of have open conversations about this stuff, and find patterns and things that work, and then combine those patterns and things that work together in ways that we could create, a new society that essentially works better. So that's kind of the foundation of it, and we explore those ideas a lot, on our podcast and the book that's coming out soon. So yeah, there's tons to talk about. It's a huge subject, just goes on and on and on with many different facets and aspects to it, and it's really interesting. We enjoy talking about it, and it's fun, and really happy that we get to do this work on a daily basis too. It's interesting and exciting. So, and thanks
That's
for having
awesome.
us on.
Of course. Yeah, I love that. Marlo.
Amanda, you go first. I'm still like recouping from the moneyed world that we live in today. So I'm getting warmed up a little bit. You called me
Understandable.
at a rare downturn. My mental health the last several weeks or months or through this season and through this process of finishing this movie and everything has just been it's like either a downward spiral or a very slow roller coaster. So I'm having more and more trouble um, maintaining that revolutionary optimism and zeal and enthusiasm. I'll go ahead and make this my turn. I'll go ahead because we
Yeah, go
don't
for it.
live in a moneyless society. We do not.
Mhm.
We do not. We live in a society where every fucking thing costs money. Everything you need to live costs money. I don't have healthcare. I don't have the ability to better myself. To be a better product for the capitalist system. Like I would be so much better of a little worker bee if I had the basic food, water, housing, shelter, all of those things taken care of. I would be a better cog in the machine. Like I think about like the CCP's relationship to their people as as related to the American system is that they just kind of recognize the importance of maintaining their farm equipment. At the end of the day, everyone in the world, just about, unless you're in a very isolated scenario, living as a hunter gatherer, or you're in a tribe somewhere in the Amazon that's being burned away, you live in a moneyed system. And, we live under this one world totalitarian government that all the conservatives and every conspiracy theorist is terrified is going to come. It's going to come creeping up on us like, oh, what if one world government, one system took over the whole world? Well, it's like you go to, Mexico and you change in your, resource tokens for a different kind of resource tokens, and people are still working the same jobs, living in the same boxes, existing in the same framework. And that's the structure that this monetary system has just very naturally produced in us. This trading system, this market system, this way of, putting a price tag on every single fucking thing that exists. And, more and more dimensions of life have been invaded by that price tag, where even things like love and companionship and connection and all of these things have been commodified and turned into things to sell. And we operate in the social media spaces a lot, and the microcosm of that is the like, which is it's just a perfect little microcosm of the money system, that it's meaningless, it has no connection to reality, but it totally dictates how cool and popular and how seen and how heard and how able to connect to other people you are. So a
Mhm.
moneyless society for me right now is an escape pod from this horrible existence. It's an attempt to build not just some idealized utopia, but to actually coalesce some sort of collective effort from the people that understand that these systems and structures and cultures are failing us, to come together and create something that works. To do the fucking obvious, which is to come together with other people with like values, pool our resources, and create a shelter from this fiery shitstorm of cost and debt, and just this continually eroding process that's just weathering us down to nothing, down to nubs, to where we can't even get on the mic and deliver a fiery sermon about a visionary world that could be.
Seems pretty
That's
fire to me right now, man.
He
a
never
moneyless
fails.
society. A moneyless society is well, I learned by failing, so I should hope I keep failing. A moneyless
Smart.
society is, it's just, I was just taking a whiz a minute ago, and I was thinking, like, man, how stupid it is that we're just embroiled in all these discussions about policy and tweaking this and changing that and all these ways of amending the system. And you got the MMT people that are like, yeah, money's bullshit, you can make as much of you want, make as much of it as you want, but we still need it. It's like, oh, we can't push people too far. When it's just like, it's just such a logical leap for people to actually go into the mire of understanding this stupid thing that exists, that dictates our lives. When I think about a relationship or an interaction I had with someone at a gas station a couple of months ago, where I was just really high, and I was just like, hey, I can't figure out the money thing. Can you just tell me what to do? Like, I was trying to tap my card, and I was trying to do the thing. And she was just like, blah, blah, blah. And I said something like, yeah, money is the fucking devil, And she said, I don't know who invented it, but they're the devil, And it was just like, people get it, that this is a stupid thing. It's unnecessary, that we have to go through all these quirks and trips and doodly da just so that we can exist. And it's really silly and stupid. And I think most people at their heart kind of get that this is the simplest way, that the simplest solution, not the complex solution of, nanomachines and AI and collaborative design systems and all these things that come out of that intention of a moneyless society. But we can go back to the second episode of our show with the beautiful unhoused community in Echo Park, where they didn't have automation, but they didn't use money. They found out that, okay, when we pay people to do stuff, it fucks up, it jacks their motivation. It makes it so that they only want to do it because they're getting paid for it. It's like, if you were thinking about how would you recreate the world, desert island scenario, would you bring money with you? Would you bring fucking
no.
debt? Would you bring a pile of cash? No, you absolutely would not. Or it would inevitably end up right back in the same
Well,
scenario.
Elon Musk wants to do that with Mars, so don't be so quick to say that most
He
people
wants to
wouldn't.
God.
He wants to recreate the exact same scenario. His version of futurism is, you have a 10-story building, make it 100 stories. You have a shopping mall that's a half a mile long, make it 100 miles long. Just fuck it.
The
Keep
guy
it
who
going forever.
reinvented the car, what do you expect?
He's a genius.
He didn't even reinvent the car. He just reinvented,
the car
Thomas
industry.
Edison,
Yeah.
He reinvented the hustling bullshit artist that gets rich off of this crazy speculative woo-woo that we call money, that we call the stock market, whose wealth quadrupled in a pandemic where everyone else in the world is losing everything. That's what money gets us, And I just think, rather than just immediately diving into all the ins and outs of how it could work, and how we can do this and how we motivate people and all this stuff, I really try to inspire people or encourage people to go into their own mind and ask those questions themselves and be fearless, to actually imagine something, to like think about a really better world. Is there money there? Do you think, like, in the perfect world, when you go to get food, do you have to give somebody a token that you had to work hours of your life for? Fuck no, absolutely not. So yeah,
Awesome.
that's a moneyless society.
Before I give Amanda a chance, I just want to speak to the fact that, like, I love that you pointed out how it's clear that this system that we are currently, this monetary system that we live in, it's not designed for people. It's very anti-human. It's there to, it's more to control us than it is to help us. And so I think that's something we'll definitely have to dive into. But Amanda, please tell me what a moneyless society means to you.
Thank you, will do. And I agree with you, obviously. It's very anti-life. And before I go into my answer, I just want to tag on something that Marlo said in the very end there. Asking people to ask themselves, to go deep inward and say, is money necessary? Would I carry it forward with me into a new era if I didn't have to, so to speak? And it reminds me of a scene that I seen on TV in a miniseries, or not a miniseries actually. I guess it's what is it? The Walking Dead. I'm sorry, I'm grasping at straws here today. Long week. And I don't watch a lot of TV, but every now and then I'll pop in and watch an episode or two of that show. And I thought that it was all too awesome, and it was certainly very gratifying to hear this in their dialogue. The main characters, they woke up in some kind of community that had been built, out of the motivation to survive and fight the beast. The beast being the zombies, obviously. And they woke up in this community, and they learned very quickly that they were going to have to earn their keep. That they had brought money with them into this community. Like the people that organized it, they turned it right back into what the world was before. Like even after going through a zombie apocalypse, people couldn't seem to let go of the notion that money is needed, or exchange is needed, or
Mm.
scarcity is needed, or a hierarchy is needed. It was mind blowing. But the thing that I really enjoyed the most was when the main characters had a quick exchange, basically saying, "Wow, I never thought that we would have to pay for rent and food after the zombies came. Like I can't believe we're having to do this again. Like what the fuck?" Um, but anyways, just to stay relevant and to bullet down very much, for me, a moneyless society is simply the opportunity for humankind to stop being stagnant and have that evolution that some would argue is well overdue, and move forward into an era, transition out of this society and this system that is obviously indoctrinating us to build upon a destructive nature, and transition instead to a society that inherently motivates us and supports us and makes us capable of being more social, creative, and benevolent in our nature. That's the thing that is the shining light for me when it comes to moneyless society. The fact that inherently in a moneyless world, in a tradeless world, in a place where there's open access versus free, which is something I've been trying to point out a lot. Things aren't
Mhm.
free in a moneyless society. There's no contrast to free. There's no price to pay per se. So things are just
Mhm.
at your fingertips. Things are open access. And in that kind of world and in that kind of environment, we don't have social structures that are based on arbitrary standards, that are based on classism, sexism, racism. There's no reason in an environment like that to have these arbitrary grudges against people and compete with people, because there's no reason to compete. Things are just available, the things you need to meet
Mhm.
your basic needs, and the things that you want to enjoy to make your life fulfilling and to make you a valuable contributor to your society. So that's basically what Moneyless Society is for me. It's just that opportunity for us to finally evolve and realize our social, benevolent, and creative potential as a human being.
Mm, man, I love all of that. You all touched on some wonderful points that I'm excited to dive into. But right off the bat, I think one thing that I just keep hearing from each of you is just how this system is not really meant to actually help us, and and something that like I kind of think about often, and each of you actually touched on a little bit, is how it actually like inhibits us from collaborating in a lot of ways, or it forces us to be more dependent on the coinage than we are dependent on each other, even though we are still dependent on each other through the monetary system. It's this weird game that's been created for us. And so and one of the things that Matt touched on when he was talking about what it meant to him is kind of like moving on past trade, or like reorienting the way that trade is used within an economy, or just within a society, within like our collaboration. And I wanted to bring that up first, because one of the first things I talk like when I'm talking to somebody about a moneyless society, maybe I'll get to them and I'll be like, do you actually really think that money's good for us? That it's, everybody says it's the root of all evil. We know that it's fucked up, and it's like at the heart of so many issues. And people are like, yeah, but it's necessary, because what else is there? There's just going to be some trade and barter system that we're going to regress to. So that's kind of my first big question for you guys is if we is during this transition to a moneyless society, how do we avoid maybe a feeling of regression towards just a trade and barter system that's essentially money, but with a little bit more complexity to it? Go ahead.
Well, so you could read the chapter in David Graeber's book Debt, The Myth of Barter, and just really smash that to pieces. Barter is not something that money evolved out of. That's, pure hocus pocus from Adam Smith and other people like that. It's part of the mythology of our economic doctrine. People did not have those relationships. They did not have an earn your keep mentality for the majority of human history, and money was introduced. not in a friendly way, in a very colonial and violent way, as labor
Mhm.
markets were smashed into people's lives and they were basically forced to regress into barter after money was introduced. And there's not enough money. You get people in these relationships of I'm out for myself. I mean, every time somebody is trading, not just money itself, but trade. I give you this, you give me that. We're done. That's it. We don't have relationships. You're reinforcing this um, sort of ritual where you are conditioning and continually reinforcing this notion that we are separate, that your needs and my needs do not converge. I have my
Mhm.
life, you have yours. I have my needs, you have yours. You know, instead of seeing, okay,
Mhm.
our needs are actually connected because we live in a community and a tribe, which is how people lived
Mhm.
for the majority of human history. So we did not have money for most of human history. We did not trade for most of human history, and even peoples that lived in relative scarcity, um, I mean, they sort of did. You could say that they did. They lived in the abundance of nature. The nature provides for people. It provides abundantly. I mean, there's indigenous peoples living in sub-Saharan desert climates that eat 3,000 calories a day and work about 10 hours a day. Can you imagine that? That's
Mm.
the majority of human history. We were not stupid. We were not bumbling around, you know, banging sticks into caves. We were very smart, intelligent, adaptive. We had technologies and relationships with nature that, newsflash, did the work for us because that's what nature is. It's a collaborative, living thing. So yeah, the barter myth is total horseshit, and I think I see a lot of people talking about, like, so somebody post on their Facebook or something today, hey, who wants to get a few acres of land and then trade with each other instead of using the corporations, and I think that's a regressive attitude. That's also like carrying forth this attitude of my needs are separate from your needs, you know,
Mhm.
and the earth can't provide for us all we need. You know, you think about the shift from sort of a market, which is like people trading with each other, to a network where you're circulating goods, where things go where they're needed. There's not this like impetus for like, I gave you a bag of rice, you give me a chicken. That's fucking stupid. That's not how people who lived next to each other, who were neighbors, lived forever. You live in a system of debt, a good kind of debt, an indebtedness to each other, which reinforces continually, I need you, you need me. I may not need something from you right now, but I will because we're in this together.
Nice. Yeah, Amanda.
If I might piggyback off of what you were saying there in the beginning, Marlo, when you talk about civilizations, ancient civilizations, as we would refer to them, or civilizations that are non-Western, that don't have this perception that we are separate and our needs are separate, I think that speaks to the fact that money has dumbed down our emotional intelligence. And that is the
Mm.
thing that we're missing here in the Western civilization, especially, is just the empathy and sympathy that's needed to perceive that we are interconnected and that our needs aren't different. I mean, of course, they're not different. Look at traffic. Everyone's headed to the same thing to do the same thing so they can get the same thing. We all have to make money to pay our bills, to have a roof and have food and take care of our families. We all need the same things. We're not, disconnected in any form or fashion as we would like to carry on. And so if I were to respond to the question you proposed, I would say that reciprocity based systems are very much what is in need right now, and what needs to be described in greater detail and pushed farther and harder into social and public discussions, so that people begin to grasp what it is to leave trade in the rear view and
Mhm.
strive to live in a truly communal setting where people do things because that's what makes sense, and that's what helps the society to survive and thrive. I'm sure Matt would agree. Reciprocity is one of his favorite things about the Moneyless Society. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I talk about that in my book a bit too. And what I really define it as is like a trade based reciprocal system. So like trade based reciprocity versus like systemic reciprocity. So where the entire system is really taking care of everyone and providing an abundance of everything for everybody. And the trade isn't necessary anymore because the system itself, with all of its workings and with society being able to kind of be in direct control of the system at large, as a society, then there's not really the need for trade anymore. People just pitch in voluntarily where they can, when they can, and essentially the system takes care of everybody in return. And by that means you're incentivized to keep the system going, because if the system collapses, then everybody's fucked, right? And so there's a lot of incentive, and there's even incentive to keep it progressing as well, because it's essentially the same motivator that motivates people right now. It's positive reinforcement. But instead of positive reinforcement coming in the form of money, which is just essentially the means to get everything that you need, we just give you everything that you need instead, right? Through this system of systemic reciprocity and the whole new economic system that we're trying to develop here. And so that's just kind of the basis of it. There's no need for that. I have to go over here and grow rice by myself. No, it's like you and maybe your entire community, has an entire community garden that maybe, I don't know, half a dozen or a dozen people are pitching in to kind of keep going for everybody, or more, give or take whatever agreements there are in your community. Oh, or region or whatever. It's up for discussion, really. And all these systems can be maintained by people. Roles can be taken on and delegated and whatnot. And that those are the types of systems that we're advocating, trying to create locally within your community, within your workplace. And instead of doing some unrelated job that doesn't really have much benefit to your life or your community, things like that, we advocate trying to get these systems in place as well by forming cooperative networks or businesses with these equal ownership models, to where people are cooperating and are producing things in their local community. And when these things are equally owned, when there's not some capitalist head at the head of the entire thing reaping all the profits, then people actually do start thinking more in terms of how can we share the benefit from this. It's not how can I just reap as much profit as possible and go home with as much as I possibly can. You start really thinking more in terms of how can everybody in the community really benefit from these systems. How can we develop them so they provide the most benefit with the least amount of input, with the least amount of resources and labor and things like that. And it's just the mindset of getting into that cooperation, mode, essentially, to where people are working together, and that there's enough for everybody, right? But it's just it's the purpose, it's the leverage point, we would call it in systems thinking. You're giving the entire system a new purpose, essentially. Instead of having the purpose of profit derived from this competitive model, we're having the purpose of abundance, right, and prosperity for everybody. And money essentially just exits stage left out of all that, because we're really focusing on what we need and what we want at that point. And I think that rings true with a lot of people. When they hear those concepts, they're like, I think we really could do something like that if we put our minds to it. We just don't really have the environment or the right circumstances yet, but you never know. That's what we're trying to create here in certain circumstances, with networks of people who actually do want to do these things and move forward on these types of communities and projects and whatnot, because we're definitely not the only ones. There's more and more traction every day for these types of ideas, and it's cool. We love hearing that, and we get a lot of positive feedback from a lot of these things that we're talking about too. So I really feel like we're headed in the right direction with all that stuff. So
That's awesome. I love that. I love the idea that we can just get on the same page and change the culture, change the mindset from like, let's stop trying to focus on just maximizing our own greed and our own needs or our well-being, if you can even do that under a capitalist system. Instead, changing it to, let's maximize everybody's well-being, because then that means I'm going to be included within that. And it's like, just that mindset shift can help people collaborate. And I love what Marla was saying, where you know the monetary system and the trade system, we've allowed it to drive a wedge in between us and make us believe that our needs are separate, even though our needs are the same. And Marlo, you wanted to jump in there. Feel free.
I was just going to say that in thinking about something as fucking obvious and simple as like a democratized workplace or democracy in general, which we very much do not have, and I think the existence of a system where are able to use the amount of stuff you have to turn that into political power and agency, and the ability to, buy media outlets and change the narrative, and, control access to water supplies and reroute roads and all these things that having true capital allows you to do, it is inherently anti-democratic. And I think that it scares people to imagine what an actually participatory democratic system would look like. I hesitate to even use the word democracy because, you know, Netanyahu calls Israel a democracy, which I don't think the people
Hmm.
who were living there before you have a say in what's going on. People of Israel, Israeli government. I don't think that's democracy. That doesn't sound like democracy. And representative democracy is not democracy. It never was. It was, there were like conferences when America was being formed, the United States was being formed, and they were like very afraid that democracy would form, and it's just, I just thinking about the objections that people have, like, oh, well, what if a few people, uh, you know, were lazy and took more than they needed, or
Wait, you mean capitalists?
yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Great.
Basically, a lot of our fears and objections are pure projections of what the existing system is doing. So I was talking to a friend about this, a friend I hadn't seen since like middle school or maybe high school. And I was explaining a lot of these things, that a lot of his objections were, I just kept having to say, like, zoom out, brother. You were talking about the existing system. You're saying, oh, what if technology was used for good? Oh, then it would go haywire, and, we would become subservient to it. And no, no, no. You're talking about the existing system. That already exists today to the uttermost extent. We're talking about a complete change in the programming and the purpose and the value system underlying all of these things. So a lot of people's objections, they're just so in the box of their own system, and they're so in the duality of propaganda. Really every person in America is, we're some of the most propagandized people on the planet, where we turn on our news every day and we see, you know, uh, the anti-democratic actions of Vladimir Putin invading other countries and stealing their sovereignty, and then you just don't see any mention of what the United States is doing, say in Haiti, and which they've done, like dozens of times over 100 years. We have smashed the attempts at peoples in our vassal states that we use to extract resources, that do not have a say in their own destiny. And when they rise up and try to demand it, as this nation was formed upon, our media will call them gangs. They'll call the people a gang, and will say, we need to send American and Canadian troops to shut them down, because there's this dissonance that we do not live in a democratic, free, participatory, equal society. And yet we live in this bubble of propaganda that constantly reinforces, yes we do, yes we do, we're free, you have it the best, you live in the best nation in the world, and you have so much opportunity, and there's so many jobs out there, you just got to go and take them. We just live in this swamp of bullshit that makes it so that people are terrified and in constant fear and loathing of their own system without understanding what it is. And so they, through the magic of propaganda, those fears and hatreds and angers and fears and pains are projected onto the very people, the very movements and motions and policies and changes and other groups of people that are fighting for their interests. That they say the communists are coming, or the socialists are coming, or
the
anarchy will,
anarchists.
will break out. It's like, anarchy will break out. Fuck yeah, that sounds great. A very
Yeah.
nuanced, complicated,
That's one of my
extremely literate
favorite
theoretical
contrasts.
system
Sign me up,
of
right?
mutual aid and reciprocity. Like, please,
Anarchy
I
is
would love if
surprisingly
anarchy
very
broke out.
soft and loving. And I just love how Hollywood always portrays it as this, burning chaos that's going to consume society and burn everything to the ground, when it's actually something that's meant to be robust and resilient. I'm sorry, I did not mean to interrupt, but you were just making so many good points, and I want to like touch on some of them, but then you make another great point, and I'm like, oh, but then you make another good point. So just want to grasp that
I
one.
just want to say, it's like you blow up one emperor, and then forevermore you're the blowing up the emperor people,
Yep.
or prime minister
Exactly.
or whatever, whoever it was. You shoot one person and start World War I, and then it's the anarchist forever. They're to blame. Go ahead, Amanda.
I just want to jump in there and say, because in the beginning of this spiel and throughout it, you made the point that people are afraid of what democracy could truly be, and participatory democracy. Um, and that's because obviously we have our belief systems and our ideologies that polarize us and make us believe that there's no way that we could unite on some kind of common ground that we could actually have a truly communal way of living. Uh, and so in a moneyless society, getting back to the very first question that Nathan had for us, that's another thing that is like a beacon of light for me when it comes to the whole concept of moneyless society, is the fact that we won't be so polarized and be grasping these belief systems that inherently make us perceive each other as a competition or a threat. uh, and in doing that, you inherently remove the fear that somebody could make a bad decision for everyone. And again, with projecting what our fears are away from what we're actually living right now, that's exactly what's going on with our political system and our corporate system. Is these people that are in place making the decisions that affect everyone are making the wrong decisions. Obviously every decision they make is anti-life and it's for profit, and it's as simple as that. So once we have a participatory democracy in place, what we will also inherently have is the opportunity to educate and produce competent people who are skilled to make decisions about life and about community.
It makes the necessity for it. I think that you all touched on so many different points, but I think the key thing to understand is the idea that we're the freest. We think that we're the freest people in the world living in America, but then the very structures, the very system that we're forced to live in 8 hours a day is, it's a master slave relationship. you know
Tyrannical.
yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
tyrannical, exactly. And it's insane how we think that, or if we could just free the people, free each of those individual cells and get them to unleash their democratic power, then it makes us unstoppable, which is something that I've been seeing in my own job, as I've been kind of working with people and trying to make change. I've seen that, I'll talk to them, and we'll be talking about how we can make changes, or this would be a great idea, like we can change this process to improve this thing. And there are, but then at the end they're like, we got to get approval from the top. But I always say, no, actually, if we're on the same page and we all understand what we need, we're the ones that do the actual work every day. We understand the ins and outs of all of these processes and we know how to change it. So if we're on the same page, we come to them with a clear plan and we've already implemented it, and we're asking for forgiveness, not permission, they have no choice but to concede. It's insane how many changes I've already made and seen what we can do just by changing their ideas in that frame. One of the most key factors is, or what's kind of, I guess, inspiring to me, the founder of my company, he gave me this book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard that. I've heard of that book.
So, yeah, it's pretty good, simple message. You just with the title alone, you already know. Start with why, Then the rest of the book is just him jerking off Apple and saying how amazing they are or whatever. But the core concept is wonderful. It's amazing because it really teaches us to rally around a why. Rally everyone, you need to lead around what we need to do what we're doing. But in a business environment, they always want to shadow or cloak the why. They don't want us to know the actual why of make profit. So they'll say, look, we're actually providing some sort of service or some sort of solution, right? We're providing this or that, and that's the true why. But in truth, if there's no profit being made, then it's all impossible. So that's something I'm really trying to get people to understand. And if we can get people to understand about a moneyless society, of having like a new why, and that why is to take care of each other, then it's going to happen. We're all going to be on the same page. We're all going to figure out how to take care of each other, and we'll all have the
Right.
same shared goal. Yeah, which is something I love. It's and I'll move over to
Sorry,
you,
go ahead.
Matt, but I just want to pose this question to you first. Um, Something we were talking about is money's relationship to freedom and how we think we're free because of money. But something that I've I was talking to my father-in-law about Moneyless Society, and he was kind of like, yeah, I get it, it might be valuable, but I don't really want to be dependent on the farmers in my area. And he's like, that's why I like money, because it makes it so I can be self-reliant.
Mm.
And I was just, no, you're not self-reliant. In fact, you're still dependent on farmers. You're just dependent on it in a new way. And money has like created this wedge between us and made us think that we don't need each other. So my question is, what is money's relationship to freedom? Does it actually make us more free, or does it make us less free?
Yeah, well, to answer your question, I think it definitely makes us less free in general. I mean, the entire capitalist system, if we talk about the system in general, we're kind of slaves to the system because
Mhm.
everything has been commodified at this point. And that's the problem, is we can't really seek out the things that we need on a daily basis to survive without having money. And so we're kind of a slave to money in the sense that we need money to survive in the current system. Now, on the other hand, if you're talking about actually having money itself, then sure, money equals freedom, right? And so there's kind of two sides of the coin that you can look at it like that. So if you're Elon Musk, you have one of the, probably one of the most, freest people in the world, simply because he can afford to do practically anything that he wants, right? But on the other hand, just the capitalist system itself, I find very restrictive, because it's tethered to the profit system. And that's why, like you were saying earlier, I mean, it's not like the Republicans or the Democrats. Neither one can really implement the solutions that are necessary to solve our problems, because the profit mechanism holds it all back. It's doomed from the start because it's all beholden to corporate interests, and that's the problem. Is the corporate interests are the ones who fund the campaigns, and even if they weren't the ones who would fund the campaigns, there would probably be some sort of other rules or regulations that they benefit from, because that's essentially how the capitalist system works, and they rig it that way on purpose. It protects property rights and the rights of the wealthy to essentially exploit the workers to make the wealthy even wealthier. And that's just essentially how the system works and how it's been set up over the course of hundreds of years. Another point that I wanted to make too, with your like you were saying with goals, it's kind of interesting. It's not to say that there is no goal of whatever product you are selling and offering. I mean, companies can have multiple goals, and they can have a goal of making a profit. They can also have a goal of, say, increasing public health. They can have a goal of, say, paying their workers well. They can have all these goals. But the problem is, as we run into this archetype, and in systems thinking, this is something else I describe in the book a little bit. It's an archetype called conflicting goals, and herein lies the rub, because a lot of the time these goals do conflict, right? What is often and most sustainable is all not often the most profitable, right? Take a bus ride is often, a bus ride on a green bus run by, renewable electricity would often be the most sustainable. But the most profitable thing is if everybody, and their mother owned an SUV and drove a heck of a lot every single day, right? And you find this pattern where these goals are at odds with each other. And since the companies are dependent on the profit system, and nobody can survive essentially without some sort of income, the profit trumps the other goals essentially all the time if the company wants to survive. And that's that conflicting goals archetype. Is the profit ends up being more important than sustainability. It ends up being more important than paying the workers well. It ends up being more important than this or that, the other, because without the profit, the company simply doesn't survive. And that's the unfortunate dynamic that creates these feedback loops of the profit just being more and more important. Whatever profitable ventures we have, they keep being developed and keep being developed and keep being developed, while everything else just goes by the wayside and doesn't really get as much time and attention or resources or investment, because the profit motive simply doesn't reinforce that. And that's that archetype that keeps repeating, and one of the many archetypes that keeps repeating in society, that produces these very destructive feedback loops with the externalities that we're seeing today. And so I just wanted to touch on that. And that's kind of a false dichotomy that I hear a lot, with people saying, "Oh, it's this goal. This company just has the goal of making profit, and they don't care at all about this." Well, a lot of the time, that's not true. They do care. It's just not our capitalist system has that conflicting goals archetype. inherent to it, and it's very. I haven't seen a solution to it except eliminating currency and trade, altogether, and the system in its entirety, basically restructuring from the ground up. So just kind of wanted to throw that in there. That's kind of what I've found through the lens of systems thinking, and yeah, that's about
Yeah,
it.
that makes a lot of sense. Marlo, you had something
I
to
was
say.
just going to say, the epitome of that contradiction lies in the so-called conscious capitalist or the green capitalist. And I
Mm-hmm.
think about a lot of people sharing the Patagonia CEO, donating his company to the planet, which really meant he just, retained control of his company, got a massive tax write-off, and got
And now has
an
political influence.
enormous amount of free publicity for his billion-dollar company. And so, it really epitomizes the fact that if you really wanted to do what was best for the environment, this system of endlessly expanding, growing, even at some kind of steady state, which is what Patagonia has tried to be at. They've tried to not grow their profit. They've tried to, keep it at the same place. Basically, the value and the strength of the stocks that maintain these companies on the, S&P 500, on this stock market, which is this crazy fucking techno algorithm monster god that we filter all decision making through in the least, democratic manner, that, less than 10%, around 80-90% of stocks are owned by less than 10% of the population. I mean, that speaks to the larger absurdity that 1% of the planet uh, controls 99% of its wealth. I mean, we've been saying these words for decades now, and people are still dancing around it, not even talking about the solution to inequality, which is equality. No one's talking about that. No one has even suggested that we could live in an equal system. But we have this problem of inequality that Bill Gates and all these people talk about. We need to address inequality. Just unpack the word, my friend. Take the in out of it. That's the solution, to make people equal. And so, these well-meaning capitalists, who I genuinely believe mean well, I genuinely believe they actually do care, as Matt was saying, about the environment, about
Mm-hmm.
workers. But they are so in the box of the rules of the game, the market game, that they have given it precedence over the real world, over the laws of physics, of science, of actual ecology, and they, will blind themselves, like this eclipse of their logic and reason, to not see that this system depends on continual deforestation,
Mm-hmm.
exponential deforestation. It depends on exponential energy use, which currently is fossil fuels. And there are not viable alternatives to continue growing the economy, even with all the renewables in the world. We cannot continue extracting and burning and, pumping and chugging and fucking and, spending and consuming at this rate that we are. We cannot do it. We will exhaust the earth no matter what. Even if we
Mm-hmm.
had cold nuclear fusion today and limitless energy was flowing through us, we would just be powering the death machine of the economy, whose
Mm-hmm.
fundamental structural goal is to support those people who have the chips. I mean, it's very simple. It's very crazy, and I think that to sort of flip that over in this sort of thread of the things that people are afraid of are the world we live in today. Oh, what if AI and artificial intelligence was controlling everything, and it was, rapidly destroying life on Earth and making people crazy on purpose to get them clicking more so that they can, be more effectively targeted with ads. And, what if artificial intelligences were deciding the fates of elections and, deciding where all our resources go, and, keeping people in slavery and destroying the world, and never. That's what's happening now. And, in thinking about solutions, we we have to use the tools of this destructive force, the tools and the technologies that, for better or worse, regardless of people will say that capitalism created all this technology. Well, I will say human beings did that. Collaboration and creativity and inspiration, which has always been and always will, and the serial process of human beings stacking ideas on top of each other. Steve Jobs did not invent the iPhone. He did not invent, because if he invented the iPhone, he would have to invent the personal computer, which he would have to invent DARPANET. He would have to invent the light bulb. He would have to invent the circuit. He would have to invent all of these other things that were gifted to him that we inherited the information, the knowledge, the technology, the science of the generation before us. And that's what we're standing upon. And so, in conceiving of a moneyless society, it is a far cry in my appraisal, although it can be scaled in many different ways and forms and levels of sophistication and simplicity and technology, is that we can use the technology of learning machines and better calculations of computing and processing and dispersed open source feedback systems that are run by the people, saying here's the supply, here's the demand, you know creating a much more sophisticated technological system that is not hindered by this 16th century at the youngest system. Or yeah, it's like we have been living in this cultural lag and this brutally primitive mercantile system of trading and bartering, of people slapping fish on a piece of newspaper and giving someone a coin for it. Like, that is the extrapolation of our whole system. Only we have AI and nuclear technology and nanomachines who are running that process. And so, in the interest of shifting toward how do we create something new, well, we use the technology that we have, doofus, and we use it for good. We change the program. We change our social media networks from being privately run psyops operations, giving us all mental illness and driving teenage girls to kill themselves and toppling third world foreign governments. And we use that social technology that allows us to communicate with each other, that's getting trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of bits of data, of feedback and information on the availabilities and the supply and the demand and the feedback and the human health and the happiness and all these metrics that we can measure objectively, just through people saying, I'm feeling like this. Hey, my name's Marlo. I'm fucking depressed because I live in a world where everything costs money. Like, that's feedback, that's data that can be coalesced into a process of actually economizing the scarce resources in the world, the things that really are scarce, because we don't live in infinite abundance. But if we live in a system that is based upon actual need, that is simplifying these processes as much as we can, that is optimized continually for the betterment of the whole, the individual is going to benefit ultimately more than they would in this current system. Elon Musk is still a slave. He works fucking 80 hours a week. You gonna tell me that guy's free? He's just like a slubby, like goblin looking, out of shape, unhealthy. Like Donald Trump would eat oh god, I'm vomiting thinking about this. He would get his staff with his infinite resources to go get him a fucking cheese pizza from Pizza Hut, and he would peel the cheese off and just eat that with with a Diet Coke. Like, that's a slave. That person is enslaved to their own game, to their own logic, to their own quality of life that is just absolutely shattered by their addiction to this gambling casino reality.
Yeah, there's a big point that you made in there about how the people that we think are the most free or the most benefited from the system are also subject to the rules of the game. And too many people think that the game or the rules or the system and the structures are just some neutral force, and that it's just like human will that creates good or bad within those systems. But it's insane how they don't even realize that they're totally subject to the rules of the game, and that those rules can affect like what's good and bad. But if we can collectively decide and or awaken to that and say, hey, if we're going to be subject to the rules of a system, let's all be on the same page about it. And let's at least say, like, hey, maybe the things we want to be subject to is taking care of each other, because I know that if everyone's taken care of, I'll be taken care of too. It's these weird little like mindset shifts. It seems so little, at least to me, this like flip switch of hatred or kindness. um, Maybe it's hard and difficult to make in the moment, but over time, it's really going to be a simple mindset shift that revolutionizes everything. I love hearing that, or I love hearing you guys talk about how we've got to work within the system as it is to create something new. Because that brings me to my next question, which is, when I talk to people about building a moneyless society, they're like, what are you going to do? Cut off the heads of all the capitalists or something like that? Look how that worked out in France or whatever. Um, I I think that we have to build something new within within the old system, but we also have to create an alternative so that the old system can crumble. But I'm curious about what you think. Do you guys foresee a need to tear down the monetary structure, or do you think it'll erode itself once we build a new alternative? Amanda, let's start with you.
Let's see here. That's a great question. And obviously, there's a lot of very elevated opinions about that, very emotionally charged opinions that come from a lot of different walks of life and isms. You have your communisms, your anarchists, um, your socialists and whatnot. And aside from the anarchists, the communists and the socialists would say, we can just work with what we've got here and just tweak it a little, and it'll be great. It'll be enough. As Jacques Fresco would say, that doesn't go far enough. We've definitely got to completely do away with the system that we're dealing with now. That's why it's called systems change. That's why it's called systems thinking. You create a system that obsoletes the old one, as Matt would say and has written, I'm sure. And that's actually how I came to know that terminology, the whole concept of obsoleting money and going forward and building a system that doesn't utilize it at all whatsoever. So, I mean, short answer, yes, we've got to do away with what we're dealing with now, like completely. But do we have to like destructively burn it to the ground in order to move forward? I feel like is part of that question, or at least implied. And that's where a lot of different opinions come into play. We have the incremental change that's taking place now, where people are starting to get on the bandwagon of the concept of that we can live without these paywalls and certain systems that we're dealing with. But that doesn't seem to be making change quick enough in order for us to avoid ecological and economical collapse. So then you have the opinion that we should just, whoever can just take hold and make it happen. But then, of course, that completely defies the whole point of helping people to realize these things for themselves. If they just take what we say for granted and say, okay, they have the answers, let's just follow them and do what they say to do, then they're still not getting it. And that's how we would end up regressing and failing, because the people did not learn for themselves from on an interpersonal level that the way forward is to say, okay, we've got to be a community, we've got to be a global community, and we've got to do things differently, and we've got to do things regeneratively, and we've got to do things rationally so we can move forward. But if I could just back up a little bit really quickly and point out something I think is very important to highlight when it comes to, does money equal freedom? And Matt was talking to how profit is so revered. And if you take that and turn the scope around a little and look at it through a laborer's perspective, the working class perspective, obviously income is what is revered. And it just speaks to how basically our freedom of movement is directly tied to our income, obviously, our purchasing power and whatnot. And that's why, obviously, so many people equate freedom to their income or to money itself. But obviously, at the root, money is a restrictive mechanism, or we wouldn't need it to get the things that we want and go the places we want to go and have the experiences that we strive to have. So I just want to throw that in there really quick.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's a really good point. I think it is an interesting distinction that has to be made, like when we say that money is freedom, because it was just like Matt was saying, like, yeah, maybe Elon Musk is more free than a worker, but that profit versus income is an important distinction. Sorry, Matt, were you going to say something?
No, I could definitely talk about your question though. Can you just say what the question was one more time? You're basically talking about
Yeah,
transitioning essentially.
Yeah, and I guess
Eat
I
the
like
rich.
to eat the rich. That's it. I like to make dichotomies a lot of the time. I'm always like, is it this or this?
Sure,
Even though
sure.
it's often both. But like the main question is like, will we have to destroy the monetary structure,
Right.
or will it destroy itself once we build a new alternative?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it'll kind of end up more or less imploding on itself eventually, but it needs to kind of be a controlled thing also, and kind of planned in the process. Because if we just kind of let it happen haphazardly, then it's probably going to be pretty messy, and it'll probably piss a lot of people off, and it'll probably kind of turn out to be an ugly thing. So the more open and democratic you can be, and plan, and actually having planning and contingencies for things and whatnot, and backup plans, the more things like that you can try to take into account, the better transition it'll be. What I outline in my book is kind of, just trying to get a network of cooperatives together, essentially. So each cooperative would kind of end up handling different aspects of daily life. Like one cooperative might end up handling transportation, another one for agriculture, another for housing, another for like clothing and things like that. And eventually, once there's enough cooperative businesses kind of working together, you can start providing the members of those cooperatives with universal basic goods and services, right? And that would stand in direct opposition to like universal basic income. I'm sure a lot of us have heard of the term universal basic income, like through Andrew Yang and the whole last presidential election. All that, the idea was kind of starting to get thrown around a lot. But we're just like, well, we don't need the currency. Let's just start giving people directly what we need, like we were saying earlier. And it would be a transitional thing at first. Throughout these cooperatives, people would still be earning salaries and getting an income and things like that. But in the long run, the goal is to phase out. Oops, sorry, I hit my mic here. The goal is to kind of phase out incomes, essentially, to where you're paying people and they have to buy everything they need, to phase out that, maybe certain things one at a time or whatever, and then to phase in giving people things for free, to where they just essentially don't need that income anymore. And how exactly that would work is like a lot of other things we've been saying, kind of up for debate and discussion. But that's kind of the general idea, to have one system phase out while the other phases in. And at a certain point, we'd really want to have a lot of this kind of figured out before the old capitalist system kind of implodes in itself or collapses, because there's probably a certain point where that system isn't really going to have the activity or the growth that's necessary to keep sustaining it. And then it may collapse. These are tricky economic complex situations that we're talking about in the future that we don't even know. This is all speculation, right? And so essentially that could happen at some point. And my train of thought is it's best to try to figure out as much of this beforehand and put as many of these systems in place beforehand that could handle an economic collapse of some sort, or at least an economic collapse of the capitalist system, so we could kind of quickly transition a bunch of people over from the capitalist system to a moneyless society without there being a lot of heartache and bloodshed, or and unnecessary violence, or even things like that. We want it to be really a voluntary thing too, that we present ideas and you're like, hey, you could try this. There's people over here and it's working great. Check these out. Check out how happy everyone is and everyone's thriving. If you want to come over for dinner, please. And so we're trying to create these communities and show people, hey man, this stuff really can work if you're open-minded. Whatever you call it, whether it's socialism or communism or a moneyless society or resource-based economy, trying to kind of get over all the isms and exactly what it is or isn't, but really just kind of focus on the outcomes of the things that we want to happen. We want systems that deliver abundance through technology and sustainability and cooperation. And we could write dissertations on exactly what to call each of these little individual experiments and everything like that. But it's not necessarily so important the name. What's important is what they do and their outcomes, and also just the opinions of everybody involved, whether people are actually happy with these things or not. And that's kind of really the goal, is to make something that people are happier with. And then people will voluntarily come over. So I think I'm kind of starting to repeat myself now on that whole thing, so I'll go ahead
Just
and
sounds like
hand
you're
it
talking
over.
about getting people to come over to the dark side.
Yes.
We'll make the thing that people want, and they will
That's
come over to the dark side for it.
Resistance is futile.
Yeah, I'm actually advocating a system I call double capitalism.
Nice.
It's capitalism, but there's no money. It's not competitive. There's no hierarchy.
Ooh.
Everyone can, the price, there's still prices on everything, but it's all zero. The wages are also zero.
There we go.
Nice.
Just make it look
And
familiar.
It's not based on extraction. There's no growth.
Right. It
It's
sounds
a steady state system.
realistic.
It's still capitalism though.
Okay.
It's still capitalism.
Yeah,
It's still
fair
a
enough.
free market. Everyone's an entrepreneur. Everyone.
That's right.
It's basically everyone is a boss.
It
Mm.
sounds
Yeah.
He's
like
a boss,
when
bitch.
the Catholicism tried to convert all the pagans. You can still
Yeah, we're capitalists now.
do
Yeah.
these things and, you know, dance around the fires and stuff, but you have to do it on this day and you have to do it in the name of this person versus whatever that guy was, you know.
Capitalism. We're
Yeah.
capitalists. No, I think that the existing system is going to collapse and is collapsing right now and has been collapsing for 400 years for all peoples at the margins because it is an explosive thing like a rocket engine that burns everybody beneath it that is lifting it up to get it up into the air. And I think that there will have to be conflict, obviously. And I think that only the people can decide that. Only the people can handle that. And I look to the intelligence of the aggregate of the crowd of dispersed and decentralized revolts and movements that have happened all throughout history spontaneously without some vanguard, telling them what to do, coming in and trying to steer them in this direction. I think that people need to know where to go. They need to know what the real problems are and what their real enemies are. They need to understand how the world works in a very structural way. Climate activists throwing soup cans at paintings need to understand that you cannot just get off fossil fuels or you will collapse the existing system. And that the real problem here is not just fossil fuels, it's that fossil fuels are driving a consumer cycle and an inane metric of GDP, gross domestic product, which is a measure of death. It's a measure of ecocide. And so I think that we will have to stop the burning of the Amazon. We will have to stop the explosion of bunker fuel that's shooting, you know, freight loads of toys across the ocean, or fucking porno DVDs, made in China, whatever it is, whatever stupid thing it is. It could be, you know, all the luxuries and the non-essential goods and those little toys you see at Mexican restaurants and the little machine where you put the coin in there. That's being made out of oil with explosive high heat and metal and steel and extraction, and all of this has to stop because the damage we are doing to the environment is already cooking the planet. And I talk to people who say that the emissions we're dealing with, the warming we're dealing with, that has sunken whole countries today, not tomorrow, not in some dystopian future. We're in a dystopian present. I read today that 30 something counties out of 30 something counties in, I believe, Nigeria are underwater. The country of Pakistan is still underwater. There have been no recompense made. That's happening today, and it will happen here. It will happen everywhere. We will see cascading, true system failures, not our little fun money system failing and a bunch of humans running around with their heads on fire. We're going to see real systems failure of the ecosystems of our planet collapsing, of the web of life coming apart and fraying and ceasing to produce. Not produce bullshit, Xboxes, hot dogs, whatever it is, but to produce life. Trees stopping producing oxygen. The oceans warming, acidifying, cooking crabs in their shells. That's happening right now. And if we don't stop that process, um, we don't we don't have a future. And so I think ultimately questions about how and when and why and do we, bust out the guillotine and flip the tables over, I think those conversations are ultimately futile and wasteful and woefully naive. A lot of them are based upon wish fulfillment. I have been in the revolutionary and the activist spheres and the political spheres for the better part of a decade now, and I've interacted with all the factions and all the people, and I've read all the theories, and I've read a lot of the books and the schools and danced with the isms, and I find a lot of people are simply hurt and are not connected to solutions. They're not connected to what the world on the other side of that could look like and must look like. They're not really adapting and responding to the needs of the planet. Your duality of do we do this or do we do this? Right now, we are reacting to everything that's happening. We are reacting in a way where people do not have free will. I don't believe they have free will. I think it's very rare to see a free choice made because people have been conditioned from birth and given a set of triggers like controls in a video game that stimuli in their world around them and sympathetic reactions in people around them and advertisements and all these things trigger in them, and it sends us into these sort of traumatic loops of behavioral scripts where we're reciting lines, and just basically going through the motions. We're reacting to everything. Everything is a reaction of a reaction of a reaction of a reaction. There's very few responses, and we have to be that response. And I think to be, as Martin Luther King said, the to tap into the creative maladjustment of a non-conforming minority is to create something that gives people a platform to actually think clearly and actually prefigure and imagine and connect with what an alternative system is. We have to get people out of this existing system so we can actually think and talk about this on a large scale, because three people on a fucking Zoom call cannot plot the revolution, cannot say for sure what's going to happen and how it needs to go down. And I wouldn't trust any three people in any, screen to do that.
Damn, I was really
Only the
counting on you
people.
guys.
Hate to burst your bubble,
Only the
but we
people
don't
can
have
do
all
that.
the answers. Everyone has the answers, though, and collectively we can put them together, put all those pieces together and move forward and make it happen.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate you kind of calling out the futility of these, like, well, is it this or that? Which one do we do? Because that's something I've been very mired in and kind of struggling with. But and I found that, and now that you bring it up, I found that really the only way that those questions begin being useful is if we meet people where they're at with a level of understanding to see, like, what kind of reactions are they subject to on a daily basis, um, what kind of situations are they just trapped in that we need to be able to understand in order to, like, love them and to collaborate with them and move forward. Because I could just I mean, I pose the question to people kind of all the time. It was like, oh well, do you think we should all have to change individually first? Do you think we need to do systems change? And you're right, there is a futility there, because at the end of the day they could say, well, I think it's this, and then nothing happens because they're still trapped in both regardless. Amanda, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, when you're talking about meeting people where they're at, because this episode is going to air to your audience, the Kindness Rebellion audience, and they may or may not be very well acquainted with certain post-scarcity terms and this moneyless society concept, obviously. I'll repeat myself here because I've mentioned this in previous episodes several times. The term technical communication, which was derived from the teachings of Jacques Fresco and the Venus Project. And an example in which it would be useful would be to apply it to what Marlo was describing and how we have got to stop, deforestation. We've got to stop the things that are flooding countries. And we have to basically slow down our rate of consumption in order to do that. And what that is, in essence, is degrowth, but that threatens people's belief systems and causes emotional reactions that are nearly impossible to mitigate because, like we were saying earlier, how our freedom is directly linked to our choices, and our choices in this system are directly linked to consumption. So that's a bit of a rabbit hole, but when you're talking about meeting people where they're at, it's definitely a challenge to introduce these new concepts and talk to people about our options, as far as making sure we don't die and that everything doesn't collapse, because people are just so fervently and emotionally tied to the conditioning and subsequent triggers, as Marlo mentioned, that they think that the world cannot be any different, and if we try to make it different, it's going to make it worse. But yeah, I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, that's a difficult thing that I've been running into a lot. There's just like, well, if you try to, well, and that's the frustrating thing about having this kind of revolutionary mindset anyways, right? Is as soon as we start talking to people about, like, we can change the world, we can do it, they're like, well, let me bring up all the potential problems that could happen, as if like that's the
And then they're like, oh,
the
you
nail
don't
in the
have the
coffin.
answers to all those potential problems, then what you're doing is fallible and you should just hang it up and get back to work.
Yeah, exactly. It's
That's
useless. Sorry.
yeah.
Which is frustrating because obviously we're more of a mindset of, like, we can do better. That's it. Like, we can do better. It's not going to be perfect, but we can do better.
Exactly.
And that's something that I think people can get on the same page on, as long as we, as the people that are trying to create this change, are willing to come to them and interact with them in a way that's like, I understand the fear you have. I understand the way you're feeling, and I understand the situations you're subject to. And I think that like the only way to heal those is together. That's the only way to do it. One thing that you both Marlo and Amanda brought up is the need for a massive reduction in consumption and the emotional reaction that comes as a result of it. That's I feel like that's one of the biggest problems, and I don't know if that's something that's simply going to, as like as we start building more resilient communities, we'll just see like, oh, there's no need for Wendy's or McDonald's. Those collapse on their own. So we don't have to try and convince people to stop eating it or to reduce their consumption. But, at the end of the day, like there are a lot of things that we just have to stop doing. And I think that's something that I've really struggled to work with people on is like we just got to stop doing this, we got to stop doing that, we got to start doing this. I'm kind of curious how each of you tend to go about those kind of transitions and those kind of conversations, in your own lives. Yeah, Amanda,
I
feel free to
keep
start.
being eager because I'm having one of those days where I'll forget what I'm thinking. So thank you for letting me be borderline disruptive. Um,
You bet.
one of the things I like to do when people meet me with pushback, as I am describing what it could be like in a society where we don't have to say depend on fast food restaurants, I like to try and walk them through a day and what an alternate world or society might look like. And so obviously people will be like, well, I like my Chick-fil-A. Don't take my Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A's life, Chick-fil-A's Bay or whatever. And I'm like, but what if you didn't have to work 10 hours tomorrow and rely on somebody getting paid less than a living wage to hand you your lunch out a window and never see that person again or care about that person or know where that food come from or care whether or not it's healthy for you? Like, yeah, Chick-fil-A is great or whatever, but like you could have a chicken meal at home if you want, if you're not working your life away, you know? Well,
Well,
how
you could
how
also
how
have a
yeah, go
you
ahead.
could also have a fully automated restaurant that can produce many different kinds of food based upon
Exactly.
the available foods that you have
Mm.
in your region with a vertical garden on the rooftop and a food algorithm that is connected to the available nutrients and or sorry ingredients and things that are being produced in your local area. You could bring in your own food and with a little bit of creative finagling and technical development and applying these problem solving technologies to the actual problems of our time, we could get to the point where a restaurant is fully automated. You can even bring in your own ingredients and say, hey, cook me this. You could give it a video of you cooking your own food exactly the way that you like it. It could cook you your fucking grandmother's spaghetti the way you like it, you know.
Yeah.
And it could have algorithms that automatically say, oh, okay, we don't have arrabbiata, whatever peppers. Well, we have this thing that can immediately substitute it. We can just create a much better, more efficient system of doing all these things. That a moneyless society doesn't just necessarily mean you all live in a community and everything that happens off of that community is the old world. I mean, when we tap into our imagination and start to actually think, okay, what would a degrowth world, a world where we're consuming less bullshit and we're actually free to think and educate ourselves, and we're using automation as much as we can, in a much more simplified formulations than in the current system, with these extremely inefficient, resource intensive, wasteful supply chains, where we're using this technology on a local basis to create a better system, and just a better system. It's like we will consume less resources in ways that I think will be largely invisible to most people, because you would be able to access, you know, the same amount or even more food, because, okay, we are living in a local region producing food which goes bad eventually, so it has to be eaten. And so, grocery stores today waste half of their food just because somebody can't pay for it, and they put locks on their dumpsters, and sometimes they have security guards so that people who don't have houses, who can't access housing, even though there's an abundance of housing already, inefficient, poorly designed housing, but whatever, can't access that. And so we are living in a system that, if we needed to transition rapidly, we could even use the existing bad infrastructure to produce an abundance of things to get people through the bottleneck of redesigning all of these apparatuses of meeting our needs. And we could have very fast, efficient public transit, works better than the existing system. Take all those cars and recycle all that metal and all that energy and all that fuel and all that shit house infrastructure. That's just terrible design of our society that just drains us of so much time, our greatest resource, time, energy, brain power, education. So degrowth means all the bullshit jobs, cut them. Everything that's not necessary for the meeting of our actual needs, cut it. Everything that we can automate, automate it. Everything that we can just completely reduce or eliminate, get rid of it. Consolidate our transportation system into something that works. Reduce the amount of going back and forth through our inefficient infrastructure anyway that people need to do. Give people the time and the energy and the access to the resources to educate themselves to do whatever they want to do to actually benefit society. And this will precipitate a massive leap forward in innovation and a massive leap forward in the amount of care, the amount of time that we have to spend with each other to think about all this stuff. That's what a degrowth world means. It doesn't just mean you keep living your shitty life that sucks anyway and your cheeseburger gets cut in half. That's a really childish, stupid thing. And I want to push back real quick on that because these MAGA communist dickheads are that's a thing. Sorry,
It's such a contradictory in
anybody out
terms.
there. But there's
Yeah, I'd
there's a
never
bunch
even
of
heard of
people out there that are basically like national socialists. Wonder if there's a portmanteau of that word that caused a lot of historical drama. Nazis. But yeah, there are these Nazis that are basically saying we need to do all this stuff for the working class, and they're saying they're communists, but they're nationalists and they're against immigration. They're really stupid people. But the really dangerous thing that they're doing is waging war on environmentalism and on degrowth in general. And what they're doing is basically just giving these words that the right wing don't know about yet. And you're going to see Fox News talk about degrowth soon. You're going to see them talk about this as this thing that they're going to, cut your cheeseburgers in half, and they're going to make you drive a Fiat, and all this really stupid, just manipulations of what the reality of a world that is not continually running on a treadmill is going to look like. Whereas in reality, it's a world where we get to just sit back and rest and think about what we did, and think
That's a
about
great
what
way
we
to
can
put
do
it
better.
when you say treadmill. And that's essentially what I try to walk people through, is the concept that what if you didn't need to access this thing because you're doing this thing instead? And of course they're like, well, how can that thing be possible? Then you go deeper into the rabbit hole, like with the example of, if you didn't have to work 10 hours tomorrow, would you need to stop at a fast food place for your lunch and have a part in that exploitation? And then of course the next question is, well, how can't I work 10 hours tomorrow? I have bills to pay. Well, what if, housing, being it is a human right to have shelter, didn't have a paywall in front of it? What if you didn't have to pay rent or a mortgage? And then their mind just starts, you can see they either completely disassociate, or a light comes on and you can see it in their eyes, and they're like, tell me more. What if I didn't have to work tomorrow and exploit people in order to do it, and be exploited in order to survive? And so anyway, that's my strategy and answer to that question is, you've got to meet people where they're at, like you were saying, and you've got to take it step by step with them. What if, and if this, then that kind of thing.
And I love that you say that, and I might actually challenge you there, Marlo, because I think the idea that it's like, oh, this, like, these are bullshit systems that exist right now, and they're destructive and they're dangerous. As soon as you bring that up, they're on the defense. They armor up, and they're incapable of understanding us and understanding what we're trying to do. Because and I guess that's the hurdle I'm trying to understand how I get past, because I do totally believe, I'm like, all of this is bullshit. Car culture is so bad for us.
So
It's
bad.
annihilating the environment. It's making life a living hell. But when I start with that, they just immediately are like, you're crazy. I can't listen to you right now. I can't even like fathom this. And so just the trying to tell them, like, this is all bullshit, this is all fucking insane, we need to stop, without actually saying that.
Right.
Like, I'm and we haven't heard from Matt. I'm curious to hear what you think about that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, coming as a person who's had a long sales background, it's kind of it's interesting because people have two main motivators, right? One is pain and the other is pleasure, and you can play on both of those, and it really kind of depends on the person. I mean, from a person that's from a perspective of a salesman, it's about talking to the people and developing a relationship first and foremost, and understanding what is important to people. right? And getting to know people, really, essentially getting to know what it is they want, their values, their goals, developing a relationship with them, and then kind of like you said, kind of trying to come at them on their level as well. Okay, well, if this is important to you, I mean, if your children's futures are important to you, then I mean, what if this whole climate change thing isn't a hoax? What if, what if there actually might be a good amount of civil unrest in the future, and you sat back and you didn't do anything about it? How would you feel about that? you know or if they're trying, I mean, that's kind of coming at it from the pain standpoint, or you could come at it from the pleasure standpoint also. Well, you want your children to have the best sort of future possible. What if we could provide your children with free unlimited abundance of healthy nutritious food in your community, and we could do this just by you and your neighbors cooperating together? Is that something that you'd be interested in? And a lot of the time, I think these concepts are easier to digest in bite-sized chunks. Like, people know that there are more sustainable systems, but they haven't really wrapped their head around combining all these things to kind of create an emergent system that is greater than the sum of all of its parts. And so a lot of the time it kind of takes piecing these things together. They're like, oh, you could do that, or yeah, and this system doesn't really work as well, and oh yeah, that's a good point, I wouldn't want to see that happen. And then and it's a lot of the time it's something that you kind of bite off in small chunks. It's a conversation that happens over time, over multiple instances, and that relationship develops and it grows over time. It's something that usually does not happen overnight. I mean, or in one conversation. It's something that's developed over time. It's an understanding that's nurtured and built upon, because it's a very complex subject with dynamic moving pieces too, that and they're listening, a lot of these people are listening to conservative news sources and things at the same time that directly chip away at some of these points that we're making. We kind of have to go back and counter some of that at times too. We're like, well, okay, they said that, but what about this? And things like that. And so it's a conversation that kind of happens over time, and our understanding deepens, and is greater over time as well. Where we don't, like we said, we don't have it all figured out. And I like to really kind of foster that open conversation aspect of the whole thing. I think that's one of the aspects of why a lot of people really kind of like what we're doing a lot more than a lot of other organizations, is because we're kind of willing to admit that we really don't have it all figured out, and we'd like to talk about it. What do you think about this? What do you think about this idea? Oh, this kind of did work over here, but oh, you have something to say about that too? Let's hear it. And I think a lot of people are open to that, just kind of discussion oriented mindset. Well, it might work, it might not work, but let's talk about it and let's dive into the facts, and then we'll make our opinions and decisions from there. And that's the personal mindset that I try to have about all of it, as well as a mindset of just kind of curiosity and discovery, as well as not really holding on to these ideas with a clenched fist and being like, oh, this is the way it has to be. Over the years, my fondness of these ideas has only deepened, but that's only because I've discovered more and more that's kind of reinforced these ideas for me. And a lot of the time when people do kind of have rebuttals and things, I do my research. I'm like, well, that's a good point. Maybe there is something to that, and I'll investigate that and I'll get back with you. And a lot of the time I've done that. Here's what I found. We come back and we have these discussions, these conversations. Sometimes I'm like, you know what, you're right, that's a great point, and I don't have anything to combat. Other times I'm like, well, there's this and this. So like I said, it's a discussion, it's an evolving thing. A lot of the time it's really difficult just to say, like, here's everything, hope you change your mind, because this is all I got, which is kind of one of the reasons why I wrote a book too. I mean, there's nearly 250 pages of all this stuff. It's tried going over all that in one conversation. It's it's like, it's something that happens piece by piece over time. But anyway, so that's kind of what I've discovered over the years, and one of the methods that I've kind of really found to be most effective in portraying these ideas is bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, I love that. It's about planting a
So-
seed and developing that. Yeah, Marlo, go on.
A little bit of research for you. The average American spends 18 days driving per year, with an average of 8 hours and 22 minutes per week. So ask your friends, what would they do with almost an entire month of vacation days? Or what would they do with an entire extra day every fucking week?
Mhm.
and just watch them be like, yeah, I like having my car. I have stickers on it. Like, fuck your car. That's not your car. The bank owns it until you miss one
Yes.
payment. And that's how single thing in your house is.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, yeah, getting people to think with their own brain is what you have to do. You can't win an argument. No one's ever won an argument. The best you can do is plant seeds, but you have to get people to stop just white knuckling it through these pre-programmed responses and this defense of a system. So tell them, say, hey, what would you do with basically an entire month every year that you spend driving? Ask them to think about how much time you spend complaining about your regular life. Stack up all that time, all the time that restaurant workers spend complaining about their shitty workplace and the things that are just the way that they are. That I find the majority of Americans, when they're off work, spend their time complaining about work and things related to it. We complain about our political system. We complain about the environment as if it's something that's just happening, or we don't talk about it at all. That's much more disturbing that my generation and people I grew up with do not talk about these things. And that's much, much worse than them complaining about them. But I think that if we can just get people to think in their own mind and ask their own damn questions, and to get them to realize that they've been propagandized, to get them to realize that they've been conditioned and that their minds have been stolen from them, and that our media apparatus is a weapon of consciousness that spends trillions of dollars every year, because I'll include advertising in that, to hijack our thoughts and control the things that we think and our associations. Our media apparatus is owned by 6 companies. Do you think 6 private corporations have our best interest at heart? It's just like there's endless arguments for how stupid the system is, but if you can't get people to step back into their own reality, their own experience of it, and question it, it doesn't mean anything. And that's a weird phenomenon that we just kind of have to accept. Like, there's a threshold to which people can imagine things. And I come back to this a lot, and I'll close the loop here, that money has taken trust out of society. It is an antitrust ritual that reinforces the fact that I can't trust you to get me back. So here's this token, which seems very innocuous, but then you repeat that billions of times every single day. And you think about that like the little Islamic call to prayer every time, You think about that like it's reinforcing this relationship with a God. And it is a mechanism that has destroyed trust in and out of the home. It has destroyed our ability to walk down the street and not assume that someone's going to fucking randomly knife us because that's a fear we have. And that lack of trust has taken away our imagination, because if you don't trust, you can't sit comfortably in your own thoughts. You are in a constant state of anxiety. And, anxiety, like when I smoke weed and I get hit with anxiety, I just turn the dial all the way up and go all the way into it. And that takes me into going from imagining what other people are thinking about me to imagining new people and imagining new worlds and things like that. But essentially, this constricted, stressed out state that we're in all the time because of money, which is the number one cause of stress in 80% of countries. That's a nice little factoid for you. And no one's talking about it. No politician in any of those countries is like, hey, we need to cut the number one cause of stress in all these countries. No one's talking about it. But yeah, I'm losing my train of thought here. Yeah, if you can get people to think with their own brain and actually step into that imagination, because that's really what we lack. Because there are many, many possible worlds. There are many options that we have. We are not constrained to one brutal fate, one sword that's going to cleave us into this or this, scenario. And as we transition to this society, it will not be a switch. It will not be an iron curtain that blankets us all in moneylessness. It can't be. It has to be something that is dispersed and decentralized, something that is freely interpreted by many, many, many peoples, showing many, many different options and alternatives, and doing it their way, and showing people how much more freedom there is. We don't have the freedom we have the freedom to choose which landlord we rent from, but do we really have the freedom to design our own home? I mean, that might sound like a lot of skills to take on. Do we have the freedom? I
To
one
choose
more
our
little
own
tangent
home,
here.
you know?
We don't have the freedom to design our world. We have no control over anything that happens to us all the time, except for what flavor of fucking ice cream we choose. And that's a silly thing that people overlook for some reason. I'm just
Well,
I'm running on
you're
empty all the
speaking to
time
the
these
fact that
days.
people white
Sorry,
knuckle
gang.
their beliefs and their ideologies because they're so afraid of losing what their definition of freedom is. Again, going back
Mm.
to how our purchasing power is directly linked to our perception of freedom. And in order to bypass or head off at the pass a lot of conventional arguments that I personally encounter, I'm sure the rest of us do too, when we start bringing up these concepts, is to simply say, and as Marlo said much earlier in the conversation, you're projecting your fears onto the solution versus realizing that's the reality you're living. People are like, well, degrowth sounds restrictive. Degrowth sounds like I won't be able to enjoy that little plastic thing that I get for a quarter out of the machine at the restaurant. Or I won't be able to make that Amazon order and get those, things that I enjoy so much that seem to make life fulfilling or what have you. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles is just being able to effectively articulate the benefits because they are nearly inconceivable when you try well, I guess that would be the word, inconceivable, or maybe imperceivable. When you try and envision what does a world look like where consumption isn't the driving force but yet is fulfilling, how do you describe that, right? uh, but again, getting back to the restrictive nature of the system we are living in now, just reminding people, hey, oh, so I sense some fear or anxiety in your voice when you say that you don't want to have that thing missing from your life. Well, here's the thing, that thing that you don't want to see missing from your life, it is trying and failing at filling a void that could be filled more effectively. I'm sorry, and in ways that don't harm you or the environment or your neighbors. And that's the world that we're striving to create. We're not trying to restrict your access to the things that you think make you happy and that probably do make you happy. We're trying to help you understand that the system we live in now is inherently restrictive. You are restricted from
Mm.
out the gate. As soon as you're born, there's a bill for you being born. And when you
Yeah.
die, there's a bill for you dying. Like, there's
Mhm.
nothing free in this world as it stands right now. And that's what we've got to
Mm.
get past and hopefully help people to understand that that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to take from them, we're trying to make sure
Mhm.
that there is something to have in the future.
Yeah. And
I'll,
like
I'll I'll counter that real quick. That
oh, okay. Yeah.
the moments and memories in our lives that are the most precious to us almost never cost a dollar. You know,
Mm.
it's maybe you have that nostalgic trip to Disney World as a kid, but I mean, how much more satisfaction and bliss did you find just playing in the backyard? Going into your own imagination, or playing with Legos or something. Those were my moments of enjoyment. And you could say that costs so there's some money in there, but it's like spending time with your family, spending time with your loved ones, having sex, doing drugs.
Woo.
These things don't cut that. Sorry.
I
I
mean,
won't.
the best
But
moments
yeah,
in
I'm
life
just
don't cost a thing, right?
that's the point. Yeah, that
You can feel
relationships
them,
are
not
what
buy
bring us meaning. And
Mm.
people may think, well, but I love my Netflix. Think about those people who only have that, though. Think about those
Mhm.
really sad, lonely people with
Mhm.
the RGB keyboards who
I resent that.
only only have. Oh, sorry, Amanda. Who only have media, who only have video games, who only
Mhm.
have things that money can buy.
Yeah.
And you look at somebody like Trump or Elon Musk. Do these people really seem happy to you? They seem like they're addicted to drugs on Twitter. Um, you know, just unhappy, complaining, never satisfied. It's never enough. That it's a fucking cliche that money does not buy you happiness. Yeah, that money is a hygiene factor. If you don't have enough of it, you're gonna be fucking unhappy. But up to a certain point, when your basic needs are met, after you go over that, it doesn't really improve your quality of life. And that's not just what every mystic and person with common sense has said for all time. That's some pretty hard science. There's social science that we've been studying these things, that ultimately all of the things, maybe not all of them, but most of the things that we are talking about are actually based in social science. They are in
Mhm.
alignment with what the science and the peer-reviewed, meticulous, falsifiable studies that people have been doing over the last 100 years. You know, between now and whenever the big hot thing was communism or whatever it is that people think that we're pushing. We are talking about applying science to our system. We are talking about upgrading and updating our view of reality with what we can observe tangibly. with what we can repeat tangibly, with all the experiments, with all the study, with all the academic work that is ignored every minute of every day to continue punishing people for crimes and rewarding them for tasks, when we know these things, these motivations that are the very primal that drive us, that we think that these are what makes the world go round, when we actually study them in experiments, and when we look at the volumes of data that we have, it contradicts every one of them. And all the fundamental gravities in our world are false. And our narratives are false. And our economics is not based in science. And our whole system is based upon a series of lies or half truths or untruths. And we are working, to align ourselves with not just some, moral imperative that we must, protect the working class and that we must, undo the evildoers. That's not really where we're coming from. We're coming from a very scientific place of being skeptical that all of us here didn't get picked or didn't pick mate pair off, with the ideology. We're not over here banging one book or one way of thinking. We are actually able to skeptically question our own thoughts and apply them to the rigors of science. I think
Oh
that was
no.
God. I think that was God getting on to me for being, a little too empirical and scientific.
worries.
Sorry, Lord. I'll get back to flagellating myself and burning little candles and things like that for your benefit.
Well, I love that, and I'm actually gonna, and I think we'll start to wrap this up here because this has been an awesome conversation, and I really love all of your insights, and I want to let all of you know that I truly do believe that each of you are revolutionaries and that we are going to change the world. I truly believe that, and
Likewise.
it's thank you, and I think it's hard because the questions that we've kind of been raising today of just like whether we are free or not is it's so complex, and obviously there's so many ways that we're not free in the way that we want to be and free in the way that we need to be, and yet I still can't deny that it like I we can wake up each day with the mindset that we're going to change the world, and if we do that enough times we will change it. And so I want to leave our listeners, if possible, if God decides to bring Marlo back, I want to leave our listeners with just kind of some action items and some maybe just some comfort and knowing that knowing some ways that we can begin this change. Amanda, let's go ahead and start with you.
Awesome. Well, I will refer to what I commonly do, and that is for you listeners to find the courage to look within. It actually doesn't take that much. It only requires a lot of courage when you start to live what you find inside. Um, but to look within and start questioning and be very objective and honest with yourself. Well, what is it about this moneyless society concept that makes you afraid to embrace it, that makes you afraid to speak on it, or to introduce it to your friends and family or what have you? And then on the comforting side of that, obviously you're not alone in the way that you're thinking. The things that your gut tell you, the little voices in your head, if you will, that say, you know what, I don't want to get up and go to work today, and I don't know why I have to. That's okay. Obviously, a lot of people agree with you at this point in time in our history, and you're not lazy, and you're not inferior, and you're not less. You're actually, some would argue, more, and inside of you have the ability to do more than what you've been subscribed. You have the ability to realize potentials that are nearly inconceivable, and it's okay for you to not want to spend your time clocking in at 9 and clocking out at 5 and making other people rich and giving people the opportunity, other people the opportunity to destroy the world that we live in. So if you're thinking outside of that box, it's totally okay, and we want you to keep thinking outside of that box and realize your potential.
Thank you, Matt.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, I think that Amanda is a great, all great points, and I agree with everything. I like to add too, just be curious and open minded about the whole thing, and encourage others to be as well. I think that's kind of one of the main things that I see people just apprehensive, of just kind of opening up to these ideas. I think in general, and just there's so many negative stereotypes about all these things that are kind of circulating around, just kind of talking about 'em and clearing the air a little bit, saying, well, there are people doing, this and this, and there's groups of people out there. You're not alone, and you can log into our Facebook group. There's thousands of people in there that are, like-minded, discussing these topics. There's books on the subject, there's movies. I mean,
There's
as
other
far as,
organizations,
yeah, exactly. There's other organizations that would all love, to have people's help and volunteer and support and everything like that as well. Um,
especially ours.
yeah. And I mean, there's no lack of things to do to try to move in these directions, whether it be improving, conditions within your community and reaching out to your neighbors, developing networks and relationships, things like that, trying to just create abundance in your own life and in your community. I mean, essentially that's what a lot of this comes down to, is what we're trying to do, is create abundance through these systems in our, own homes and our communities and around us. And a lot of that really just starts with reaching out to people, developing relationships, and talking about these ideas, kind of throwing them around and talking about them, like, maybe some of this is actually a possibility, but at least kind of clearing the air. And I think that's a really good place to start with all this, because you can't really do much without just even getting these ideas out there first. And 90% of the time, a lot of the people just haven't even heard of a lot of these concepts or thought that these things are possible. And I think we really kind of are in the creating awareness stage a lot of the time. I mean, it's nice to want to take action, but we kind of need to gather enough resources and people and support and everything in order to really take significant action. And I feel like we're getting to that point, but it's still probably going to be a little while before we really start to move the needle on some of this. But the more people are aware of it, the more of these conversations start happening, the closer we'll be to all of that. And so that's why I really truly appreciate what people like yourself, Nate, are doing here with your kindness rebellion podcast, and having us on and spreading the word with all this. And I think you're doing an awesome job, and keep up the fabulous work, and be happy to come on again in the future and do more work with you. And really appreciate all the help and support you've given us as well for everything too. So mean that sincerely, and it means a
Ditto.
lot. And yeah, and just love to keep working with you in the future too. I think it's awesome. So thanks again.
Likewise. Thanks, man. Marlo, send us off.
I'm just thinking about a scene that I filmed with my good friend Professor Jeff Cates on a mountain overlooking the city for the film we've been working on. And he said, at the end of his class, where his students' minds have been blown out the side of their head by pretty inarguable change to their view of history and sociology and the dynamics of human relationships, because he's basically radicalizing his students, with this curriculum as a professional professor. He says, they ask him, what do I do? What can I do about this? And he said, you can't do anything. Only we can do something. Only we can do something about this. And I think that's very powerful and resonant. And I think that, like, I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting the other day, which, a lot of critiques with that entity, that system, but I was craving community and connection, and don't drink alcohol. So I figured I'd get it there. I didn't, but whatever. And I was just really upset and taken aback, really, that all these people pulling up their chairs to sit in a circle and be together and have this, and they all spoke of this religious, camaraderie and this feeling that they got there, that it saved their lives. And I never really got that from, you know, that group, because I kind of know, like, after that little hour of dopamine or serotonin that people get from that sense of temporary community, they go back to their individualized lives. They go back to their house, in their car, and then they go to their job and they experience their problems and don't really question the structure of their society that made them want to dissolve their brain in poison to begin with. You know, it's all personal, it's all individual, it's all you, it's all my sickness, my trauma. When we all have trauma, because we're in a soup of it. We're in a traumatizing system. We're in a system that's built upon conflict and competition and scarcity and lack. And so these sicknesses we all deal with and the problems that we experience every single day of our lives are utterly predictable. And after a while, I don't feel satisfied scratching the itch of complaining about them all the time. I have to do something about it. I have to think that you know, as this beautiful Chris Christopherson song, "To Beat the Devil" says, if you waste your time talking to the people who don't listen to the things that you're saying, who do you think is going to care? That you could die explaining that the things they complain about are things they could be changing. And I think about that pretty much every day in some form. That the things we bitch about, we can change. We can change them. We can create an alternative system. We can scratch our itch for community and sociality and connection that we seek in bars and clubs and social clubs and, you know, podcasts and Facebook groups and social media and all these things that don't quite hit it by forming permaculture, permanent culture, forming communities, forming collective enterprises where we come together and say, okay, being a person is too fucking hard for one person. It was never meant to be this way. The human being alone in nature is fucking preposterous. If you see a human being wandering alone in nature, they're a killer. That's somebody who's been kicked out of society. That's not a human being. A human being is a collective enterprise. We are a social organism, like an ant. We're not like an ant. We're more than that. Not to say that ants aren't great and amazing, and that nature itself isn't this interconnected web of relationships. There is no sole being. There is no individual. Even you yourself are comprised of billions of microorganisms that make up your body. So you don't exist as an individual. And as long as you internalize all this and say, whoa, what can I do? You can't do shit. Sorry. And so we have to come together. And we can. And life gets way easier when we share the burden of being alive. And it stops being a burden to put food on the table. What a stupid thing that we've been human beings for like 300,000 years. And many of us, most of us, do not have it really figured out how to eat food, how to just get like the right nutrients in us, you know? And I'm making a broad generalization because indigenous peoples have that shit way figured out. They're healthy.
Mhm.
They don't need to go to personal trainers and psychologists and philosophers and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. They don't, devolve into an addictive mass when they touch a poison because they have it figured out, as we need to get it together. It's very simple. We need to collectivize. We need to work together. We need to stop thinking about ourselves and our own little problems and our own little successes and our own little struggles and grow the fuck up and work together.
Amen to
Agreed.
that.
Thanks, everyone. This has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate all of your time.
Yes, thank you.
This will happen again. Appreciate you all.
Yeah. Thanks for having us
We
on, Nate.
appreciate
It's
you,
a
Nate.
pleasure.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Of course.
You're great, Nate. Keep it up, brother.
Thanks.
This is the end of our first season. And I just can't tell you how grateful I am to all the guests that we've had. Incredible guests. I may have one more episode for you. One more extremely special, completely unexpected, will blow your mind, a mystery guest. Maybe. I don't know. I might sit on it. I might just sit on it. Who knows? I might paywall it so that only our Patreon subscribers can listen to it. Because unfortunately we don't have many Patreon subscribers, because even though we give and give and give, and we're relying on the voluntarism of like making free content and asking people for donations and support, a lot of people, I guess, can't do it or just won't take the step to just add, tithe $55 a month, or more, whatever you can give. We really appreciate it. It really goes to like filling my stomach when I'm editing these episodes and helping me remain a full-time activist and not have to debase myself with all the trappings of this civilization. But all of us are working class activists. We don't have George Soros funding. This is all a labor of love. All of this has been done by a group of very small, devoted people. And if you doubt that a group like that can change the world, don't, because as Margaret Mead said, that's all that ever has. Join us. Do the things. All right, I really gotta fucking go. Goodbye.